For 15 years, my parents erased me from Christmas like I never existed. But when I inherited the one place they couldn't live without, everything changed. And what I discovered in those old event logs made me realize the exclusion was never about me at all. Let me take you back to where this all started. Because the first time I realized something was deeply wrong, I was 22 years old, standing in my tiny apartment on Christmas morning, staring at my phone, waiting for a call that would never come. My name is Sarah, and I need you to understand something right from the beginning. My family wasn't poor, they weren't distant. They weren't living across the country, they were 15 minutes away, hosting the biggest Christmas celebration our town had ever seen, every single year, and I wasn't invited. Not once, not ever. Now I know what you're thinking. There must have been a fight, some terrible falling out, something I did that was so unforgivable they cut me off completely. But here's the thing that makes this whole situation so much darker. There was no fight. There was no argument. There was just silence. It started the Christmas after I turned 18. I had just started college, moved into the dorms. I was excited, nervous, ready to come home for the holidays and tell everyone about my new life. I called my mom 2 weeks before Christmas, asked what time I should come over, what I should bring, the usual questions, and she said something that didn't register as strange at the time but would haunt me for years. She said, "We'll let you know." That was it. "We'll let you know." I waited for a call, a text, an email, anything, and Christmas Eve came, and my phone stayed silent. Christmas morning arrived. I was alone in my dorm room because everyone else had gone home. I called my parents' house, no answer. I called my older brother Derek, straight to voicemail. I called my younger sister Emma, she picked up. I could hear music and laughter in the background. Lots of voices, the unmistakable sound of a party in full swing. I asked her what was going on, where everyone was, and she said something so casual, so unbothered, that it felt like a punch to the chest. She said, "Oh, we're at the Christmas party at Grandma's venue like always, didn't Mom tell you?" I said no, nobody told me anything, and there was this pause, this horrible, stretched out silence where I could hear her realizing something was wrong. She said, "Oh well, I'm sure it was just a mix-up. I have to go, Merry Christmas," and she hung up. Just like that, I sat there on my dorm bed, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what just happened, and I told myself it was a mistake, a miscommunication. Something that would be cleared up after the holidays. But it wasn't. When I came home for winter break, my parents acted like nothing had happened. They were warm, friendly. Asked about school, we had dinner together, watched movies, it was normal. I brought up Christmas, asked what went wrong, why nobody told me about the party. And my dad looked confused, said he thought I wanted to spend it with friends at college. I said no, I was alone, I wanted to be with family. And my mom just shrugged and said, "Well, next year you'll know to confirm earlier." Next year. Like it was my fault. Like I was supposed to chase down an invitation to my own family's Christmas. But I told myself, fine, next year I'll make sure there's no confusion, I'll confirm early, I'll make it crystal clear I want to be there. So the next year, November rolls around. I call my mom, I say, "Hey, just confirming I'll be home for Christmas. What day is the party? What can I bring?" And she says, "Oh honey, we're still figuring out the details. We'll let you know." There it was again. "We'll let you know." I waited and waited. December 20th, nothing. December 22nd, nothing. Christmas Eve. I called again. My mom sounded annoyed. Said they were busy with last-minute preparations. She'd call me back. She didn't. Christmas Day, same thing as the year before. I called Emma. She was at the party again. This time she sounded uncomfortable. Like she knew exactly what was happening but didn't want to say it. I asked if I could come, if it was too late to join, and she said, "I don't think that's a good idea, Sarah. Maybe next year, maybe next year." That became the family motto. Year 3, same thing. Year 4, I stopped asking, I just waited to see if anyone would reach out. Nobody did. Year 5, I tried showing up unannounced. Drove to my grandmother's venue where the party was held. It was this beautiful old estate called Willowbrook. Huge property, ballroom, gardens, the works. I parked outside. I could see the lights, hear the music. I walked up to the entrance and my brother Derek was standing there, almost like he was waiting for me. He said, "You can't be here, Sarah." I said, "What are you talking about? This is a family party. I'm family." He looked genuinely uncomfortable, like he felt bad but wasn't going to budge. He said, "Mom and Dad don't want any drama, just go home." I asked what drama, what did I do, and he couldn't answer. He just kept saying, "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." I left. I sat in my car and cried for an hour before driving back to my apartment. Year 6, year 7, year 8, the pattern continued. Every year I was excluded. Every year I tried to understand why, and every year my family acted like it was no big deal. The worst part wasn't the exclusion itself, it was the gaslighting that came with it. Whenever I brought it up outside of the holiday season, my parents would minimize it, say I was being dramatic, that it was just one day out of the year. My mom actually said that to me once. She said, "Sarah, you're obsessing over one day. We see you all the time. Why does Christmas matter so much?" And I wanted to scream. Because it wasn't about Christmas, it was about being erased. About being the only member of the family deemed unworthy of inclusion. About watching my siblings post photos on social media every year. Big family gatherings, everyone smiling, and I was nowhere in those pictures. Not because I didn't want to be there, but because I wasn't allowed. Year 9, I started therapy. My therapist asked if I'd ever confronted my parents directly. Demanded a real explanation, and I realized I hadn't. Not really. I'd asked, I'd hinted, I'd expressed hurt feelings, but I'd never sat them down and said, "Tell me right now why I'm not invited to Christmas." So year 10, I decided to do exactly that. I went to their house in November. I said, "We need to talk about Christmas." And before they could give me the usual runaround, I said, "I need a real answer. Why am I not invited? What did I do?" My dad looked at my mom. My mom looked at her hands. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said, "It's not about you, Sarah. It's just easier this way." Easier. I asked what that meant. Easier for who? And she wouldn't elaborate, just kept saying, "It's complicated. Family dynamics are complicated." I pushed harder. I said, "I deserve to know. I deserve an explanation." And my dad finally spoke up. He said, "Your grandmother prefers it this way." My grandmother. The same grandmother who sent me birthday cards every year, who called me on holidays, who had never, not once, said anything negative to me. I said, "That doesn't make sense. Grandma loves me," and my mom said it's not that simple. I demanded to talk to my grandmother directly. My parents said that wasn't a good idea, that it would upset her. I left their house more confused than ever. Year 11. I reached out to my grandmother myself, called her, asked her directly, "Grandma, do you not want me at Christmas?" She sounded genuinely shocked. Said, "What are you talking about?" "Of course I want you there, you're my granddaughter." I told her I hadn't been invited in over a decade. And there was this long silence, and then she said, "That can't be right. Your parents must have their reasons." But she didn't sound convinced, she sounded confused. Year 12, my grandmother's health started declining. She was in her late 80s, still sharp as ever, but physically slowing down. I visited her more often, and one day she mentioned the Christmas parties. Said she didn't know how many more she'd be able to host. I asked if she was the one organizing them, and she laughed, said, "No. Your parents took that over years ago. They just used my venue." Something clicked. My parents were running the parties at my grandmother's venue. But my grandmother thought I was being invited. Year 13. I started asking more questions, carefully, trying not to upset my grandmother, trying to piece together what was really happening. I learned that my parents had essentially taken over Willowbrook. They managed the events. They controlled the guest lists. My grandmother just owned the property. Year 14. My grandmother's health got worse. She had a stroke, recovered. But it left her weaker, less mobile. I was at the hospital with her more than anyone else in the family. My parents visited, my siblings visited, but I was there almost every day. One afternoon, just her and me, she grabbed my hand and said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something about Willowbrook." She said she'd been thinking about what would happen to the property after she passed. She had a will. It was all sorted out. But she wanted me to know that I was important to her, that she saw how much I cared. I didn't think much of it at the time. Year 15. This past year. My grandmother passed away in October. It was sudden, peaceful. She went to sleep and didn't wake up. The funeral was large, well attended. My whole family was there. And for once, I was included. I was welcomed. I was part of the family again. But only because it was a funeral. November came. I was still grieving. And then I got a call from my grandmother's lawyer. He said there was a reading of the will. I needed to be present. I figured I'd get some small keepsake. Maybe a piece of jewelry, a photo album, something sentimental. The reading was held at the lawyer's office. My parents were there, my siblings, a few aunts and uncles. The lawyer went through the standard bequests, money divided among the grandchildren, personal items distributed, and then he got to the property. "Willowbrook," he said. To my granddaughter Sarah, I leave my estate known as Willowbrook, including all buildings, lands, and associated assets, in recognition of her devotion and care during my final years. The room went silent. My mother's face went white. My father looked like he'd been slapped. Derek and Emma just stared. I couldn't process it. I said, What do you mean? And the lawyer repeated it, showed me the paperwork. It was real. I inherited Willowbrook. The venue my parents had been using for 15 years. The venue where they'd held every Christmas party I'd been excluded from. My mom found her voice first. She said, "This has to be a mistake." Mother wouldn't, she couldn't, and the lawyer said the will was very clear, updated just 6 months before my grandmother's death, completely sound. My dad said, "Sarah, you need to understand we've been managing that property for years, we have plans, commitments." I said, "You've been using it for parties I wasn't allowed to attend." He didn't have a response to that. The meeting ended. My family left without speaking to me. And I sat there with the lawyer, trying to understand what just happened. He handed me a sealed envelope, said my grandmother left this for me, instructed him to give it to me after the reading. I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten, my grandmother's shaky script. It said, "Dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you now own Willowbrook. I want you to know this wasn't a decision I made lightly. Over the past few years I've learned things about your parents that disappointed me deeply. I won't go into details here, but I discovered that you were excluded from family gatherings, deliberately, systematically. And when I confronted your mother about it, she lied to me, said you chose not to come, that you were too busy with your own life. But I knew better. I saw how much time you spent with me, how much you cared, and I realized you were being punished for something that had nothing to do with you. Willowbrook is yours now. Do with it what you will. But know that you deserved better. You always did, with all my love, Grandma." I sat in that office and cried. Not sad tears, angry tears, relieved tears, validated tears. My grandmother knew. She knew. And she'd given me the one thing my parents couldn't live without. I drove to Willowbrook that evening. I had the keys now, it was mine. I walked through the empty ballroom where 15 Christmas parties had happened without me. I went into the office where my parents kept event records, and I started going through files. What I found made everything make sense in the worst possible way. There were logs, years of them, detailing every event held at Willowbrook. And next to the Christmas parties, every single one, there were notes in my mother's handwriting. Year 1, exclude Sarah per agreement. Year 2, exclude Sarah per agreement. Year 3, Year 4, Year 5, same note, over and over, per agreement. I searched for anything that explained what agreement, and I found a folder labeled Family Trust Discussion. Inside were emails between my parents and my grandmother from 16 years ago, before the exclusion started. The emails were about my grandmother's will. My parents were worried about how the estate would be divided. They wanted assurances that they'd inherit Willowbrook, that it wouldn't be split among all the grandchildren. My grandmother had refused, said the estate would go to whoever she felt deserved it, that it wasn't something to be negotiated. My parents pushed back. There were several tense exchanges, and then, buried in the thread, I found an email from my mother that made my stomach turn. She'd written, "If you insist on being difficult about this, perhaps we need to reconsider who gets included in family events. Some people appreciate what they have, others take it for granted. Maybe it's time to make that distinction clear." It was a threat, a barely veiled threat to exclude people from family gatherings unless my grandmother gave them what they wanted. My grandmother's response was firm. She said, "I will not be manipulated, my will is my decision. Threatening to exclude family members is cruel and I won't tolerate it." And then, a few months later, I found another email from my mother, apologizing, saying she'd been stressed, that she didn't mean it, that of course everyone would be included in family events. But that Christmas I wasn't invited, and neither was my grandmother's decision to give them Willowbrook in her will. They'd excluded me as punishment. Not punishment for anything I did, but punishment aimed at my grandmother. They were proving a point, showing her they had the power to cut people off, hoping she'd cave and give them what they wanted. And my grandmother, I realized, probably didn't know at first. She trusted them, believed them when they said I was busy or didn't want to come. By the time she figured it out, years had passed, and she was getting older, frailer, less able to fight them on it. But she'd fought back the only way she could. She'd changed her will, given me Willowbrook, taken away the one thing they'd been trying to secure for themselves. I spent the next few days going through everything. organizing the files, understanding the full scope of what my parents had done. They hadn't just excluded me from Christmas. They'd used Willowbrook as their personal venue for years, hosted events, charged other family members rental fees, pocketed the money, all while my grandmother thought they were just managing the property out of kindness. They'd been profiting off her generosity, and they'd been using my exclusion as leverage in a long, bitter fight over inheritance. I was collateral damage in a war I didn't even know was happening. Now, you might be wondering what I did next. December came around, just a few weeks after I inherited the property. I got a call from my mother. She was civil, almost friendly. She said, "Sarah, we need to talk about Christmas. We've already sent out invitations for the party at Willowbrook. We need access to the venue." I let her finish. Then I said no. She said, "What do you mean no?" "We've been planning this for months," I said. "Willowbrook is my property now. You don't have access anymore." There was silence, then she said, "You're being petty. This is family tradition." I said, "Family tradition that I was never part of," and she had the audacity to say that was a misunderstanding. 15 years, Mom. 15 years of misunderstandings. She tried a different approach, said your grandmother would want the family to stay together, to keep celebrating at Willowbrook. I said, "Grandma left me a letter. I know why she gave me the property. I know what you did." Another silence, longer this time. Then my dad got on the phone. His voice was hard, angry. He said, "If you don't let us use that venue, you're going to regret it." I said, "Is that a threat?" And he backpedaled, said, "No, just think about what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart." I said, "I'm not the one who spent 15 years excluding a family member. You did that," and I hung up. They tried calling back. I didn't answer. They showed up at my apartment. I didn't let them in. My siblings started texting. Derek said I was being unreasonable, that I needed to let go of the past. Emma said she understood I was hurt, but this wasn't the way to handle it. I didn't respond to either of them. Instead, I did something that felt incredible. I planned my own Christmas, at Willowbrook. I invited friends, coworkers, a few distant relatives who'd always been kind to me, people who actually wanted me around. I hired caterers, decorated the ballroom, put up the biggest Christmas tree the venue had ever seen. And on Christmas Eve, I posted photos on social media. Me at Willowbrook, surrounded by people who loved me, celebrating in the place I now owned. The place my parents thought they'd inherit. The place they'd used to exclude me for over a decade. My phone exploded with messages from my family, angry texts, accusatory calls. My mother said I was rubbing it in their faces, being vindictive. My father said I was ungrateful, that everything they'd done was for the family's benefit. I didn't engage. I was too busy having the best Christmas of my life. But the story doesn't end there. Because in January, things got even more complicated. My parents hired a lawyer, tried to contest the will, claimed my grandmother wasn't of sound mind when she changed it, that I'd manipulated her. Their lawyer contacted me, said they were prepared to fight this in court. I contacted my grandmother's lawyer. He said the will was airtight. My grandmother had been evaluated by a doctor before making changes. There was documentation proving her mental competency. Their case had no merit. But they pushed forward anyway, filed paperwork, started the process. It was going to be ugly and expensive. I could have backed down, could have offered some kind of compromise. Let them use the venue occasionally, tried to smooth things over. But then I remembered 15 Christmases alone, 15 years of exclusion, 15 years of gaslighting and lies, and I decided, no, I'm not giving them anything. I hired my own lawyer, a good one. We prepared a countersuit. Not just defending the will, but exposing what my parents had done, the rental fees they'd collected, the money they'd made off my grandmother's property without her knowledge. All of it documented in the files I'd found. When their lawyer saw our evidence, the tone changed. Suddenly they wanted to settle, wanted to avoid court, wanted this to go away quietly. My lawyer advised me to consider it, said a settlement could save time and money. I said no, I want this on record. I want everyone to know what they did. We went to court. It took months, depositions, testimonies. My siblings were called to testify. They were forced to admit they knew I was being excluded, that they'd gone along with it. Emma cried on the stand, said she felt terrible, but didn't know how to stop it. Derek was defensive, said he thought I'd just moved on, that I didn't care. My parents testified, tried to paint themselves as victims, said they were just trying to keep the peace, that my grandmother had been difficult, that I'd always been overly sensitive. The judge didn't buy it. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, emails, my grandmother's letter, all of it painted a clear picture. The will was upheld. Willowbrook was mine, legally, permanently. But more than that, the judge ordered my parents to repay the money they'd made from unauthorized use of the property, tens of thousands of dollars in rental fees, event charges, all of it collected while my grandmother was alive, thinking they were just helping. They were furious, humiliated, publicly exposed. And I felt, for the first time in 15 years, free. The family fractured after that. Derek stopped speaking to me entirely. Emma reached out occasionally, apologized, said she wished she'd done more. I appreciated it but kept my distance. My parents, I haven't spoken to them since the trial. They sent a few emails, trying to justify themselves. Explain their actions. I deleted them without reading. Some people think I went too far, that I should have been the bigger person, forgiven them, moved on. But here's the thing. Forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about releasing yourself from the weight of what they did. And I've done that. I've moved on. I just moved on without them in my life. Willowbrook is thriving now. I turned it into a legitimate event venue, weddings, corporate events, community gatherings. I hired a proper management team, everything above board, transparent, profitable. And every Christmas, I host a party, not a family party, a community party. Open to anyone who wants to come, free food, music, gifts for kids. It's become a tradition in town. People look forward to it. Last year, over 200 people showed up. Families, singles, elderly folks who had been alone otherwise. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. Someone asked me if I ever felt sad that my family wasn't there, and I realized I don't. Because the people at that party, they chose to be there. They wanted to celebrate together. And that's what family should be, not obligation, not manipulation, not conditional inclusion based on someone's agenda. Just people who genuinely care about each other. I heard through distant relatives that my parents tried to host their own Christmas party that year. Rented a different venue. Sent out invitations. Hardly anyone came. Turns out, people knew what they'd done. Small town, word spreads, and most of the family was disgusted by it. My parents are basically pariahs now, isolated by their own actions. And I should feel bad about that. I should feel guilty that my decisions contributed to their downfall. But I don't, because they made their choices. They chose to exclude me, to manipulate my grandmother, to prioritize their inheritance over their daughter. And those choices had consequences. I've thought a lot about why they did it, what the real reason was, and I think it came down to control. My parents needed to feel like they were in charge. Like they could dictate who mattered and who didn't. And when my grandmother refused to give them that control through her will, they exerted it in other ways. I was the easiest target, young, living away from home, not in a position to fight back. They thought I'd just accept it, fade into the background, maybe eventually stop trying, and for a while I almost did. Year after year of rejection wears you down, makes you question your worth. Wonder if maybe you really are the problem. But inheriting Willowbrook changed everything. It wasn't just about the property. It was about validation. My grandmother saw what was happening. She believed me. She took action. That meant more than any apology my parents could have given. I've also thought about my siblings. Whether they're truly sorry or just uncomfortable with the fallout, Emma seems genuine. She's tried to rebuild our relationship. Slowly, carefully. I'm open to it, but cautious. Derek, I don't think he'll ever admit he was wrong. He's too much like our parents. Needs to believe he was justified. And you know what? That's fine. I don't need his approval. I don't need anyone's approval. For 15 years I chased acceptance from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth it. And now, I'm done chasing. I've built a life I'm proud of, a career, friendships, a community that actually values me. And every time I walk into Willowbrook, I'm reminded that I earned this. Not through manipulation or pressure, but through showing up, through caring, through being there when it mattered. My grandmother saw that. And in the end, that's what counted. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever been excluded, overlooked, erased by people who should have loved you, I want you to know, it's not about you, it's about them. Their insecurities, their need for control, their inability to see your worth. And the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness, it's building something so beautiful, so fulfilling, that their absence becomes irrelevant. That's what Willowbrook is for me now, not a reminder of what I lost, but a testament to what I gained. And every Christmas, when I see that ballroom filled with laughter and light, I think about those 15 years of silence and I realize they didn't break me. They made me stronger. They taught me who I am when nobody's watching, when nobody's validating me, when I have to choose my own worth. And I chose it. Every single day, I choose it. That's the real ending to this story. Not the inheritance, not the lawsuit, not even the vindication. It's the moment I stopped waiting for my family to invite me in and started building my own table. A table where everyone's welcome, where nobody gets forgotten, where love isn't conditional. That's the legacy my grandmother left me. Not just property, but permission. Permission to let go of people who hurt me. Permission to create my own traditions. Permission to define family on my own terms. And I'm using that permission every single day. So to my parents, if you ever hear this, I hope you understand. I don't hate you. I don't even think about you most days. You're just people I used to know, people who made choices that pushed me away. And I've accepted that. I've moved on. And I'm happier than I ever was trying to earn a place at your table. To my siblings, the door's open if you ever want to really talk, really acknowledge what happened, really make amends, but I'm not holding my breath. And to my grandmother, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you for seeing me, for believing me, for giving me the tools to reclaim my life. I hope you're proud of what I've done with Willowbrook. I hope you're smiling every Christmas when that ballroom fills up with people who actually want to be there. I hope you know you saved me. Because you did. In more ways than you probably realized. This whole experience taught me something crucial. That family isn't about blood. It's about presence. It's about showing up. Consistently, genuinely, without agenda, and the people who do that, those are your real family. Everyone else is just relatives. And I've filled my life with real family now. People who check in, who celebrate my successes, who support me through failures, who would never, ever forget to invite me to Christmas. Because they know what it feels like to be forgotten, and they've chosen differently. We've all chosen differently. That's the community I've built. That's the legacy I'm creating, and honestly, it's better than anything my biological family ever gave me. So yeah, for 15 years my parents forgot to invite me to Christmas. But in the end, I inherited something far more valuable than a venue. I inherited the freedom to choose who gets to be part of my life. And I'm choosing people who choose me back. Every single time, without hesitation, without conditions, without the need for reminders or confrontations or legal battles. Just simple, honest, consistent love. That's what Christmas means to me now. Not the decorations or the gifts or the traditions, but the people, the real people who show up. And if you're someone who shows up, who values connection, who understands that inclusion isn't a favor but a fundamental expression of love, then you're invited. Always. No matter what, because at my table nobody gets forgotten, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure of that. So yeah, for 15 years my parents forgot to invite me to Christmas. But in the end, I inherited something far more valuable than a venue. I inherited the freedom to choose who gets to be part of my life. And I'm choosing people who choose me back. Every single time, without hesitation, without conditions, without the need for reminders or confrontations or legal battles. Just simple, honest, consistent love. That's what Christmas means to me now. Not the decorations or the gifts or the traditions, but the people, the real people who show up. And if you're someone who shows up, who values connection, who understands that inclusion isn't a favor but a fundamental expression of love, then you're invited, always, no matter what, because at my table, nobody gets forgotten. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure of that.